Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Okay, come on in, folks. We have a lot today, and so I want to jump right in. I'm so grateful to all of you for being part of this learning. Everyone who's here in person, and the people who are with us online, and really looking forward to continuing this over the course of the year. We've readjusted the schedule a little bit. The time and place will be the same. You'll get more information as we move forward. But I wanted to start by inviting us to say the bracha, to say the blessing that we say when we study Torah. It is la'asok b'divrei Torah, so Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Mechalam Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I want to thank all of you for being part of this learning journey with me. I sat down at the dinner table last night. I have all my little chickens at home right now, and they said, "What are you teaching tomorrow?" And I said, "We're going to look at the Choni story." And literally, Levi, who's a junior, said, "Oh, the Choni story, I know, I've known it my whole life." And I said, but the point of this class is for really to do a deep dive so that I can see things in a totally different way. And then I gave them a 2-hour lecture on Choni, and they couldn't have been happier about it. They loved it. So we're going to do this week and next week two different elements of the Choni story. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you will know a lot about Choni after these 2 weeks. And it might seem a little bit counterintuitive the way that I'm going to bring this to us. But I am going to sort of start in the middle of the Choni story, and then we'll work our way to the before and after, the beginning and the end. A little bit like the inverse of what we did with Rabbi Yochanan in the beginning. So if you're just joining us for the first time today, welcome. And each of these sessions stands alone. And yet the more we do, the more accumulated shared knowledge there is in shared language. And so we can shortcut a little bit as we go. So, okay, so we are going to look next week at the aspect of Choni that's perhaps most well known, which is that he is called Choni HaMe'agel. He is called Choni the circle maker, because Choni, who was a person who apparently lived around the time of the Second Temple, lived in the mid-1st century BCE, was a kind of charismatic holy man, magic maker, who was not exactly a priest and not exactly a rabbi, but had special powers and was in direct relationship with all of the elite and authority of his time. And I'm going to look at his rain-making abilities next week. But I had to include just the version of it that appears in the Mishnah, which is where we first read about it, just to give you a little bit of context so that we can understand the part of the story that we're going to be focusing on today. So bear with me. I'm going to intro you very quickly to Choni, and then we're going to jump to the part of the story that we're going to be focusing on today. Okay, so in the Mishnah, in Ta'anit 3:8, we learn the following. There was an incident in which the people came to Choni HaMe'agel, this magic-making, charismatic holy man, and said, "Pray that the rain should fall." And he said to them, "Go outside and bring in your clay ovens so that they won't dissolve from all the rain that I'm about to bring." But then he prayed, and the rain did not actually come. So what did he do? He draws a circle on the ground, and he stands inside the circle, and he cries out to God and says, "Master of the universe, your children have turned to me. I'm a member of their household. I will not move from this place until you make it rain." And when he does this, some rain starts to fall, but very gently rain falls. And Choni says, "God, this isn't what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the rain of benevolence, blessing, and generosity." At that point, the rain starts to really fall, like it did here in LA the last couple of days, but it didn't stop. It was a normal rain, but a normal rain that came sort of ceaselessly, like ours did, and I guess back like now in this city. The roads weren't made for that, and the homes started to leak, and the people actually had to leave their homes, and they went up to Jerusalem, up to the Temple Mount, to Har HaBayit, because they'd been rained out of their homes. And they said to Choni, just as you prayed for the rains that they should fall, you also need to now tell God that we need the rains to stop. And he says, well, go out and see if the claimant stone, this very important place where people would go when they had lost an item to litigate how they could retrieve the item, go see if that thing has been overrun by rain. If so, then I'll pray to God for the rain to stop. And if not, then the rain can keep going. And again, we're going to go into all of this in greater depth next week. Really interesting. And then we have this character, Shimon ben Shetach, who's a rabbi, who says, if you weren't Choni, I would say that you should be ostracized for the way that you're behaving right now. Drawing a circle, getting in it, pointing to the heavens, demanding that it rain, demanding more rain, demanding that the rain stops. This isn't the way that we engage God. You're like a child having a tantrum to your parent, and the parent is giving you whatever you want. And the parent says, I'm going to take away the phone. And the child yells and screams, and the parent's like, here, take the phone, right? And that's not the way that we should be engaging God, but yet you're Choni, so I have to respect that. And that's the way the Mishnah introduces us to Choni HaMe'agel, okay? We're going to look at the way that the Talmud treats this episode next week. But I'm going to now skip ahead to text number 2. Which tells us after the circle and the praying for rain and the rain coming and then the rain stopping, a little bit of a different aspect of the life of Choni HaMe'agel. I just want to do a quick sound check. Can the folks who are with us virtually hear? Are we good? Okay. Okay, so now look down at text number 2, where you will see our beloved Rabbi Yochanan introducing us to the next aspect of Choni that we need to pay attention to. I think the fact that it is Rabbi Yochanan, whom, if you've been with us from the beginning, you know has great significance, will matter to us as we continue with our interpretation today. Rabbi Yochanan says, all of the days of that righteous man, Choni's life, he was distressed over one pasuk, one verse of Torah that he could not understand. And here's that verse. Shir Hamalot, B'shuv Adonai et Shivat Zion hayinu kecholmim. If that sounds familiar to you, it's because we say that line very often in our prayers. And what the line says is, it is a song of ascents. When the Lord brought back those who returned to Zion, we were like dreamers. By the way, this pasuk from Psalms, some people say that this should be Israel's national anthem, not Hatikva. And it's a beautiful idea that when they came back to the land, they were like dreamers. Except Choni doesn't understand what that could possibly mean. Choni says, is it really possible for a person to sleep and dream for 70 years? Because after the destruction of the first temple, until those Jews were allowed to come back into Jerusalem and rebuild the second temple, was 70 years. And he says, what does it mean, hayinu kecholmim, that they were like dreamers? How can you sleep for 70 years and dream for 70 years? And here's the first question that I want to ask you today. What's going on with this brilliant Choni HaMe'agel who has access to the Holy One, who we will learn later was able to decipher the most difficult of text and bring the most nuanced and subtle of analyses, that he can't understand the verse? So first I want to ask you, what does the verse actually mean when it says, when we came back to Zion, we were like dreamers? What's the I would say maybe obvious read of what that verse from Psalms means? Does anyone have an idea? Yes.
I might as well speak up. I imagine that in the 70 years, people were dreaming of something better and where to go, and it took 70 years for clarity to arrive there.
Okay. So either for clarity or for the actual arrival, right? Meaning, Shir Hamalo Peshuv Adonai, that this is the song that we sing is that the whole time that we were in exile, we were dreaming, one day we'll go home. And then one day we were allowed to actually go home. Why do some people think that this should be the national anthem for the state of Israel? Because for 2,000 years, we held a dream that we might one day be able to return home, and we were one day able to return home. That seems obvious, right? It's beautiful poetry, but it seems almost obvious. Yes?
I also wonder if it's the land, the land was void of the people. The land was void of the people for 70 years. So it likely wasn't as they left it or as they once knew it. So when they come back, they are like dreamers, seeing the land as they remembered it or as they would like it to be, and not as what.
Oh, that's great. Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you, Candace. That's great. Now there are. I think that we can read this text poetically, but for some reason, Choni cannot. He's Amelia Bedelia. You know, did you know that children's book where they say to Amelia Bedelia, the maid, they say, draw the curtain, draw the bath. And so she goes and takes a pen and paper and draws a bath. And so he's very literal, and he's essentially saying, it's not possible for a human being to sleep for 70 years and dream for 70 years. So he simply doesn't get it. By the way, to Rashi, it is also very clear and very obvious what this means. Rashi says, Hayinu kechomim, we were like those who dreams. He's talking about the Babylonian exile. It was 70 years. And it was like a dream. Now, which adds another potential poetic read to this. Like, now that we're back, all of that time in exile feels like a dream. But either way, we have kind of elastic enough minds that we could imagine why the psalmist would choose to use the language of we dreamt for 70 years that we'd return and then we got back. Choni, no. Choni is a literalist. He's a fundamentalist. And I want to plant the seed that might be part of the reason that the rabbis struggle with him. We'll pick up that thread next week. Okay, so now if you look at text number 4, forgive me because I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly, the narrative part, and then we'll have time to talk about it. Okay, so his whole life he struggled with this pasuk. How could it be that somebody could sleep for 70 years and dream for 70 years? Now, you may know this part of the story. One day he's walking along the road, and he sees a certain man who is Nata Charuva, who is planting a carob tree. And Choni says to the man, this tree, how long is it going to take for this tree to bear fruit? And the man says to him, 70 years. Now, of course, it does not take a tree 70 years to bear fruit, although the rabbis will try to tell us that a female tree can bear fruit in just a couple of years, but maybe it was a male fruit of a certain species, which would in fact take 70 years for it to grow. But we don't need to be like Choni. We don't need to be literalists. It seems very clear that what's happening is that Choni is saying to this person who might be an elder, what's the point of investing in this world when you are not going to be around to bear the fruit of your investment, right? And he says to the guy, you're not going to be here in 70 years. And the man very famously responds, I found a world full of carob trees. And just as my ancestors planted for me, so too I am planting for my descendants, which is why this is a favorite line, because that's just perfect, right? Okay, so what the farmer knows, what the planter knows, which by the way, he's not named. He's called Gavra. He's called a man. Which, by the way, one of my colleagues who wrote a brilliant essay about this contrasts the Gavra, this grown man who's teaching this lesson, to Choni, who's like a child, according to Shimon ben Shetach, kicking and screaming and having a tantrum at his parent in order to get what he wants. Here's a child who's learning this. He's not actually a child in the story, but he acts like a child who's learning a lesson from the Gavra, from an unnamed man who has more wisdom and more insight than the wise holy man who's able to talk to God and make the rain come. And what he is speaking to when he speaks of inheriting a world that was full of abundance and therefore feeling some kind of sacred obligation to return that abundance to the world, even though he himself will probably never reap the reward of what he's putting forward, is a world of interconnectedness. It's a world of interdependence of the generations in which we see each other and offer mutual support to one another, not only across space, like me to you, but also across time, like me to my great-grandchildren, which is something really almost unfathomable. And I'm reminded of these studies that came out about, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, that said that it's almost impossible for people to imagine themselves in the future different than they are now. We can see who we were and how different we are from who we were, but it's very hard for us to imagine that we will be fundamentally different from how we are now. It's very hard to future orient in that way. And yet we can all identify with this farmer because the way that he thinks about the world feels very essential to who we are as people, maybe as Jews. He's teaching Choni a truth that Choni does not see. And even as he says it, Choni fails to grasp it. It's the most basic truth about the earth and our relationship to the resources of the earth, about our relationship and obligation to one another. And Choni, the wise man, can't seem to understand what he's saying. We know this because he sits down and eats lunch. Like, he's just delivered the most profound Torah, and he sits down and he eats, which you might hear in this an echo of other biblical episodes in which very dramatic events happen. And for example, the brothers sit down at the edge of the pit where they've just thrown Joseph and eat. Well, that's what Choni does. And did he plant the seeds for the wheat that were ultimately harvested to make the bread that he's eating? Of course not. And so he's even enacting the very Torah that the farmer is sharing with him, but he doesn't seem to get it. Something's not clicking for this guy. So I think that for Choni, for somebody to plant a seed that will not bear fruit in his lifetime, that person is wasting their time and their resources. He is a person who lives on immediate gratification. He is not like anyone else of his generation, able to point to the heavens and say, bring rain now. No, I mean more rain. Now I mean less rain. And God responds immediately. But here, someone's teaching him a lesson about longevity and investment in the future, and he just doesn't get the ROI on putting something into the earth that you will not see bear fruit. There are donors like this, right? There are people who only want to invest if I'm going to see the fruit of it in the immediate, right? Franchise IKAR. I want to see 200 IKARs all across the country in the next 3 years. Like, we've had people who've come to us and said this, and we're like, that's not how it works, right? This is about ultimately building an idea, Lebriut. And so investing in something so that in the long term we can see this thing take root and bear fruits that we might not even be imagining. Okay, so he sits down and he eats bread, and this is where, if you've never heard the story, it gets kind of weird, as if the raining in the circle is not weird already. Okay, so what happens? He falls asleep, as one often does after having a big meal, and he falls asleep, and a cliff forms around him. So here we have to now imagine that the natural world is somehow complicit in the teaching of this story to Choni. A cliff forms around him so that he disappears from sight. He's now in the wilderness. Nobody can see him. And so he's able to sleep uninterrupted for guess how long? 70 years. And when he wakes up, he sees a certain man, Gavra, Lahahu Gavra, who is gathering carobs from the tree. Now, it's not the same Gavra as before, because Choni asks him, are you the same guy that I saw planting this tree? For Choni, it was like a minute ago, but in real time, it was 70 years ago. And the man says, no, I'm his grandson. I'm the grandchild of the man who planted the seed. And from that, Choni says, oh, I must have slept 70 years. He then looks up and sees that his donkey, in the meantime, has not been asleep. He's been hard at work, making many baby donkeys in the course of the 70 years. So what does Choni actually learn from the story? Choni learns not that the farmer's right and you need to plant now because one day your grandchildren will reap the reward of the seeds that you plant. But Choni learns that 70 years have passed, right? He has failed at this point to learn the lesson, the core lesson that we all intuitively understood as soon as we both read the pasuk and heard the farmer speak. But he still fails to understand that lesson, and all he has learned so far is that a lot of time has gone by. So now look at number 6. I promise you I will pause so that we can process all of this. So Choni then does what any of us, I imagine, might do. He goes home. He realizes that he has been displaced in terms of time, so he wants to be placed in terms of space. So he goes to his house and he asks, is the son of Choni HaMe'agel alive? And they say to him, no, the son has died, but the grandson of Choni is alive. It's actually really like tragic story. His grandson's still alive. And he says to his family members, but I'm him. I'm Choni. And they say, like, who is this lunatic? Get out of our house. Remember, they didn't have family photos, right? So like they had no idea what their grandfather looked like. And the father, who's the only one who would have known him, has already died. So they don't believe him. So he who has been displaced is looking to place himself again, and he has no home. So then he does the next obvious thing, which is he goes to the Beit Midrash, which for Choni was another kind of home. Also, Beit Midrash, the study hall, is a bait. It is a kind of home for the people who make it their home. And there he walks in while he hears the rabbis talking about him. And the rabbis say, his halachot are as enlightening as in the years of Choni HaMe'agel. For when he would enter the study hall, when Choni would enter the study hall, he would resolve for the sages any difficulty that they had. So this adds a dimension to our understanding of Choni that we did not get from the story in the Mishnah of the rainmaker, because it seemed like he was a magician with some like special supernatural powers or some ability to connect with God. But now we're learning that he was also a scholar, that he was also well respected by the rabbis. And so he walks in hearing them talking about him. And by the way, this should have a strong echo of another episode in the Talmud, which I wonder if anybody was, if your hyperlinks are what is it called, illuminating. Yes.
Is it with Moshe or is it Rabbi Akiva?
Yeah, it's both.
Yeah.
It's both. Right, so in Menachot, Moshe is brought into, Moses himself is brought into the Beit Midrash, the house of study, where Rabbi Akiva is teaching. And it's like he does time travel forward. And he falls into this great despair because he hears what Rabbi Akiva is teaching and he doesn't understand a word of it. And he's like, it's like, imagine, Melissa, imagine if in like 100 years we come back to IKAR and we like don't know anybody and nobody knows us and we don't recognize any of the tunes and we're like, and even, I mean, we're like, what, I don't understand. Like we planted a seed for something and it exists in the world now, but it's totally unrecognizable to me. And then in the case of Rabbi Akiva and Moshe, then Rabbi Akiva, who's drawing meaning from every crown that was drawn on every letter in the Torah, then attributes that to Moses. And that gives him a moment of comfort because he realizes, like, I don't even understand them. I think some grandparents feel this way about their grandkids. Like, these aren't the values I raised you with. And the grandkids are like, yeah, they are. I'm just manifesting those values in a totally different way than you ever imagined that I would. So Rabbi Akiva gives Moshe a small sense of comfort because he understands that this is just the way it goes. You plant a seed and the fruit that is born is not necessarily what you imagined, but it's still a reflection of what you've planted in the world. So the same thing happens with Choni. He goes into the Beit Midrash and he hears them talking about him. And so he says, this displaced person who slept for 70 years says, I'm Choni, I'm the guy that you're talking about. But like his family, they simply don't believe him. And they don't pay him the proper respect. They don't give him the honor that he used to get when he would walk into the Beit Midrash and the honor that he frankly deserves. He saved the people from drought. And he offered the most nuanced and subtle and beautiful interpretations of text. And as a result, Choni chalash date, a phrase that we have seen numerous times now in our few weeks together, his spirit weakens. He gets really upset. Rachame, he prays for mercy, umit, and he dies. Right? This is a trope that we have now seen numerous times. He gets very upset, he prays for mercy, and he dies. And then Rava concludes this entire story by saying, Hainu d'amre inashe, o chavruta, o mituta. This is why people say, give me chavruta, give me friendship, or give me death. And here I want to pause for our first real pause in this conversation to try to understand what the meaning of this story is, at least according to Rava's interpretation. What is the moral message of the time travel of the magic maker Choni HaMe'agel such that he lands 70 years in the future and almost immediately dies? So let's draw out what we think is actually going on here. Yeah, Candace.
I mean, I think he did this extraordinary thing, right? He lived through 70 years, but he comes back and he's unrecognizable to anyone, and he doesn't know anyone. And that's not living at all, right? And I think that that's the thing, like, Chavruta, I think it's like, either you live and you can be seen and known by the people around you, or that's not really living. And so Choni dies.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that. And I think this, in a way, it gets to the heart of what Chavruta is, right? When two people sit together across a text, they are not only able to decipher the text more deeply than either of them would be able to alone, but they are able to see and be seen by each other in a way that at least Rava argues is absolutely essential to our lives. We cannot live unless we are able to see and be seen by each other. Right? And that depth of connection is one that can be born of shared study together. It can also be born without the text in the middle. There are other ways that we can find each other, but in the language of the rabbis, it's the language of chavruta. It's through the engagement of conversation around sacred text and sacred ideas. Not only do we understand our tradition, but we actually understand each other. And to not be seen in that way, to not to not have anyone who understands your mind and your heart and your spirit, you may as well be dead. That's what the text seems to be saying, which you should hear in this a strong echo of the story from Bava Metzia that we started with of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, because once Reish Lakish, if you're just joining us now, they were chavruta and also, I think, deeply in love with each other. And once Reish Lakish died, Rabbi Yochanan did not have anybody who could fully see him anymore. And he died because he could not sustain life without having a partner, without having somebody who knew him, somebody who saw him. Okay, what else do you see here? What does this evoke for you? Yes, Rabbi Panitz.
Okay, so I wonder if Choni pre-70-year nap is ever really a model of chavruta in the first place. Yeah. Or if he's always mituta. Like, here's this model of a guy who, we think of chavruta, we think of like constructive partnership. I don't know, is that what's happening with God? Or is he just, as you said, sort of like a child begging for his phone to be returned, right? And then he has this human interaction with this man, and he doesn't understand the man at all. He doesn't understand what's being taught. He doesn't understand the notion of planting for a future generation. And then even his description of the rabbis in the Beit Midrash is as someone who would come in and resolve disputes. I mean, that's not necessarily what a chavruta does. A chavruta, you're back and forth. You don't just come in with the answer. So I wonder if he was ever truly alive and in chavruta.
Yeah, this is great. And I want to suggest that the only other being that Choni is in real dialogue with is God. Because Choni talks to God, God responds. There's this, as we'll see next week, there's this kind of playful dynamic between God and Choni. And who does Choni not go to when he wakes up? He does not go to God, right? Who was the only one that ever saw him. So it's interesting because he does have I believe he does have a chavruta, and that's God. But now all of a sudden he's looking for the dynamic that he has with God in his relationship with human beings, but he never did the work of planting the seeds of those relationships in his lifetime. And so those seeds don't exist anymore. Yes, Rabbi Levy.
Well, I think to Rabbi Panitz's point, I think it's really interesting. He's a dreamer, right? So dreaming happens in time and without time, right? And so when Choni asks for rain, he could have avoided the whole thing by saying, send rain of blessing, right? But instead, he's just asking, like, this is what I need in this moment. Like, he's not thinking, but that's the same Choni who can't think it forward in time. Of like, what will be the impact of this request or this statement or this rain?
Yeah.
So he's like, send rain. Oh, yeah, that's not enough. I need more rain. Now this is too much. I need less rain. And so it's like this back and forth, but that's like almost like he's completely divorced of like what that impact will be on actual people, because he's living in some dreamland with God.
Right. He is detached from the human reality around him. And by the way, when does Choni, I'm going to come to Keith in a second, Malik. Keith, who's up here in the front row. When does Choni pray for rain? Only when the drought has become so severe that the people are going to die if they don't get water. Like I don't want to focus too much on the rain part today because we have something else that's very exciting that we're going to go to in a moment. But he is a person who seems out of touch with the human community around him, and only enters the human community to be in his relationship with God and his chavruta with God only when they insist that he does that. Keith.
Okay, I just want to say first that this issue of how much value we place on future generations is perhaps the central issue in economists' thinking about climate change and other investments in the earth. It is absolutely, it divides economists who place a high value from those that place a low value. But with regard to this story, I think what it means is that you cannot just skip over. If you're going to plant a seed, you have to tend it, you have to water it for 70 years. You cannot just skip to the future
Yeah.
and reap some benefits and then become involved.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Keith. I'm going to hold that for 1 second because I'm going to come back to this in a moment. But I wanted to just share a little piece of Dr. Vivek Murthy's parting prescription for America on the question of loneliness, which I think is a real and important takeaway of this story. It is what Rava wants us to see as the primary takeaway of this story, that essentially no man is an island. You cannot live alone in this world without investing in real relationships. And so as he was leaving office, and he served under both President Obama and President Biden, and as he was leaving office in January of, was it just 1 year? Oh my God. In January of last year.
Don't you wish you were a dreamer?
Oh my God. He put out this beautiful short essay called My Parting Prescription for America, in which it's essentially an argument for community. He says community is a powerful source of life satisfaction and life expectancy. It's where we know each other, where we help each other, where we find purpose in contributing to each other's lives. And he argues, Dr. Murthy argues, that the fracturing of community in America is driving the spiritual crisis that is threatening our fundamental well-being. And it fuels not only illness and despair on an individual level because, o chavruta, o mituta, because lonely people are more likely to get sick, are more likely to have inflammation in their system, early onset illness. You've heard me talk a lot about this, but it doesn't only fuel illness and despair on an individual level, but it also fuels pessimism and distrust across the society, which have all made it painfully difficult for us to rise together in response to common challenges. We don't like each other, so we do not want to go to the street together and fight against the challenges we face. So he says, what makes community possible? There are three core elements: relationship, service, and purpose, and one core virtue, which is love. Together, these create an ecosystem of meaning and belonging that are essential for fulfillment. We will spend the rest of our lives unpacking that argument. I think he's right. That is why we are in community together. It doesn't mean we always like each other, but it means we do love each other. And being together in shared investing in relationships, working and being of service together, and working towards shared purpose together is actually life-sustaining. And you might not feel it every single day, but that is the very stuff of life. That, I believe, is a very important takeaway from this story. Yeah, really quick.
I was just going to say, it calls to mind that common belief, whether it's true or not, that once one spouse dies of old age, another one follows quickly, because people are not paying attention to them as well as perhaps they are not paying attention to the rest of the world.
Okay, right. And so Mary was saying, I don't know if everybody could hear, but that sometimes, especially with elderly couples, when one spouse dies, the other one will die with, soon afterwards, even if they hadn't been unwell before, because the relationship itself was the fuel in their lives. And if you don't shift course and invest in other relationships and engage in a life of service and get reacclimated with your sense of purpose, then you can be left to feel like Honi, which is like nobody in this world knows me anymore. And it's really quite tragic. And it's why we have to pay special attention as a community to mourners, because there is an instinct when your loved one is in the ground to meet them there, right? And we, the community, pull them away from the graveside and form two lines of humans on both sides saying, you want to stay here, but you can't because there's all this life for you back there. And I'm going to be with you on this side, and I'm going to be with you on this side, but we're going to make sure that you stay in this world. Thank you for raising that. Okay, so now I want to tell you that I think there are a lot of messages to the story. One about, as Keith said, environmental sustainability, and really thinking about what it means to be a generation and, frankly, a nation of takers. people who are much less invested in planting for the future than we need to be. I think there's a moral message here about loneliness and about how in some ways loneliness is killing us and how painful it is to feel like you're not known in the world. I think that there's an important moral message here for us about immediacy versus long-term investment, and how Choni did not get the memo that in order to live a life of meaning, we have to future orient, not only because the earth will self-destruct if we don't do so, but because that's what it means to be part of an interconnected ecosystem, is to invest in the future, even if we ourselves will not bear the fruit of the future. But I couldn't help but think that there's something more going on in this story. And so I want to share with you for just a couple of minutes as we now pivot to something that I think is a very compelling additional read to the story. So in order to do this, we have to look at the Yerushalmi. So remember that the primary Talmud that we study is the Bavli. It's the Babylonian Talmud. But a lot of the stories and narratives have echoes of or are echoes of narratives that also appear in the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud. And looking at how they differ can be really important and instructive for us. So look at text number 8, if you would. And I'm going to go through this super quickly, but I want to just look for the feeling. You know, when you share with someone your dream, like dream interpreters say, it's not so much about the details, it's about the feeling that it gives you. So this is the dream that comes from the Yerushalmi, from Ta'anit. Choni the circle drawer was the grandson of Choni the circle drawer. So immediately there's two Chonis here who lived close to the destruction of the temple. He went to a mountain to his workers. While he was there, the rain started to fall. So he went into a cave, and when he was sitting down, he fell asleep, and he stayed asleep for 70 years. So in this case, the rainfall makes Choni take cover. He goes into sleep during the rain, and he falls asleep for 70 years. And what happens? In that time, the temple is destroyed, the first temple, and by the time he wakes up, the temple is rebuilt. And this might hyperlink you to another well-known story of a person who goes to sleep under one regime and wakes up under a totally different regime, a story from American folklore. Does that any echoes here? Yes, this is the Rip Van Winkle story, okay? He goes to sleep under the rule of the king, and he wakes up and the United States of America has been born. Okay. At the end of 70 years, he wakes up, he leaves the cave, and he found that the whole world had changed, as Keith was indicating before. At a place where there had been vineyards, now there are olive trees. Where there had been olive trees, now there's a field. He asks about the province, and they say to him, what is news in the world? He asked about the province and said to them, what's going on in the world? And they said, do you not know what's happening? And Choni, who's been asleep for 70 years, says, no, I have no idea what's happening. And they say, who are you? Who doesn't know what's happening? The whole world has changed. How do you not know? And he says, but I'm Choni, the circle drawer. And they said, we heard that when Choni used to enter the temple courtyard, the whole courtyard would light up. So Choni, having slept for 70 years, goes to the courtyard, walks in, and the whole place lights up. So he still has his magical powers, and then he recites this pasuk about himself. You might have guessed it. B'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kechomim. When God leads people back to Zion, we were like dreamers. Okay? The version of the story in the Yerushalmi is so different from the version in the Bavli. In this version, Choni is spared witnessing the calamity of the destruction of the first temple, and all of that sense of loss, all of the grief, all of the displacement, and he wakes up only to discover that already everything's being rebuilt. He sleeps through the devastation. And he has his power, and because he's able to still illuminate the space, he presumably is honored by the people still, as opposed to in our story, where Choni falls asleep basically because he doesn't understand Torah. He doesn't understand the verse that says, how can you sleep? And then he comes out of it 70 years later. Now he understands the pasuk, the verse, but he dies because he's completely unknown in the world. So the question is, why does the Bavli, our dominant text, tell this story, a story of descent, a story of a tragedy, whereas the story in the Yerushalmi is a story of incredible success, kind of heroism. What did you say, Scott? Rebirth, right? So what's actually going on here? You ready? Okay, so I'm going to, by the way, and there's lessons in both. There are lessons in both, but I find it interesting that these stories are so fundamentally contradictory to one another. Okay, so there, I want to bring us to the scholarship of a rabbi in Israel called Tzvi Ron. He wrote an incredible piece in the Review of Rabbinic Judaism about 10 years ago. And here he points out what we've already noted about the Rip Van Winkle story, because you can't read Choni and not think about Rip Van Winkle. But it's not just Rip Van Winkle. This is a very popular motif in ancient literature also. The idea that a holy person would go to sleep for many, many years and then wake up on the other side to a new reality. But according to Tzvi Ron, and I believe him, every time that motif is used, it follows the trajectory of the Yerushalmi. It follows the trajectory that the person goes to sleep in order to bypass or sidestep some kind of human calamity, gets to the other side, and it is a moment of rebirth. So if that's true, the question is, why, even more so, why then does our Talmud tell the opposite story? Is there a deeper moral message that the rabbis, from Rabbi Yochanan in the beginning to Rava at the end, are trying to teach us, using Choni as a tool to tell a particular story to us? You ready? This is what Tzvi Ron, is everyone with me? Is anyone with me? Okay, great. Okay, so there is yet another version of the Choni story that is not in the Yerushalmi and that is not in the Bavli, but is actually told by Josephus. Okay, so look at text number 9 on page 4. In Josephus's version of the story, the followers of Hyrcanus laid siege to the temple where Aristobulus had fled. These are two descendants of the Maccabees, two descendants of the Hasmoneans, and they're brothers. And they are at war with one another. Because you might know that the Maccabean revolt that we celebrate Hanukkah about didn't turn out so great. If you look not at the immediate, the way Choni would, but if you look at the long-term effect of that revolt, it ended up being a great and grave tragedy for the Jewish people, which is part of the reasons that the rabbis made up the story about the oil lasting for 8 nights, because they didn't want to celebrate the story of this violent military assault against the Greek Syrians, because yes, they got the Greek Syrians out, but they planted the seeds for something much darker. And I just have to say, in the wake of the events of this past Shabbat, what does it mean to live with such immediacy that all you can see is, yes, something that may be considered good happened in the immediate, without considering, are we not planting the seeds for something much more nefarious to ultimately come to pass if we look just even a little bit more to the future, okay? So what happens is the followers of Hyrcanus laid siege to the temple where Aristobulus had fled, and they saw it. These are the descendants of the Hasmoneans. Judah Maccabee's great-great-grandson goes to Choni, our guy, and says there's this righteous man who's dear to God, and once it happened that in a time when there was no rain, This guy prayed to God to end the drought, and God heard the prayer and brought the rain. So what does Hyrcanus want to do now? Go to Choni and have Choni draw a circle and pray to God and say, destroy my brother. Destroy the camp of Jews that opposes my camp of Jews. You have special powers, you can do that. So this man, Choni, hid himself when he saw that the civil war continued to rage. But he was captured and taken to the camp of the Jews, and he was forced to ask to place a curse on Aristobulus and his fellow rebels, just as he had by his prayers to put an end to the rainless period. But when, in spite of his refusals and excuses, he was forced to speak by the mob, they're like, Choni, now's the moment. Tell God to destroy my brother, to destroy that entire camp. This is a fierce civil war. We need supernatural intervention. And he tries to run away and he tries to hide, but he cannot hide. And so he stands up in the midst of the crowd and he says, God, King of the universe, these men standing beside me, the people of Hyrcanus, are your people. And those who are besieged are also your people. This is one family. So I beseech you not to hearken to them. Don't listen to Hyrcanus against Aristobulus. Don't listen to them. Don't make come to pass what they want, which is the utter destruction of the other half of their family. That's what he does with his moment in the circle. And when they heard him, they stood up and they stoned him to death. That's Choni's death, according not to the Yerushalmi, but according to Josephus. Choni dies because he refuses to call God to kill half the Jewish people in order to make happy the other half of the Jewish people. And what Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Rohn will argue is that what's actually happening is that the rabbis in the Bavli don't want to lose that message. And so what they do is they create this whole fantastical story of Choni, because this is a brutal story. By the way, I wish they had just told this story directly, because we need direct, real talk about what it means when our community turns against each other, even inside the same family. But instead, they do it in this dramatic, kind of poetic, surreal way, in which they say that this person, Choni, could not live because he could not see the others and could not be seen by the others. But it's not just about individual loneliness. It's not just about what happens to me when I don't receive the kind of friendship and love and kavod that I have worked for in my life. It's about us. It's about what happens when our family turns against itself, and then only death and destruction can come. So Choni, I think, is actually being, in a way, I wouldn't say he's being used, but Choni here becomes the embodiment of a warning, not only about the need for community, but I said I called the title, like, you know, on community, on unity. Is it also about unity? Is it also embedded within this fantastical narrative in which, like, every Jewish school child has seen the Bim Bam, you know, video of the cartoon Choni asking for water and then the carob tree? Like, is there an embedded message for our time that says not only do we need each other, you and I, but we need each other? And if we fail to see each other as brothers and sisters and siblings, o chavruta, o mituta, either we learn how to see one another or we're all gonna die, right? That is what's at stake here. And that message is important enough that it pushes the rabbis to counter the trend of the motif of the sleeping holy man who awakens to an illuminated world and says, be really careful. As Dr. King said about the Rip Van Winkle story in his Oberlin commencement address, do not sleep through the revolution, because it's very possible that when you awaken on the other side, we're all gonna die. Because in this time, in this period, the in-between space, we have lost each other. We have forgotten how to see one another's humanity. And that is precisely what's at stake in this moment. Any questions? Yes, RBZ.
I don't have a question, but I'm really blown away. Reflecting on the stories that you just learned, or re-envisioned, being a person in their 70s, who I remember 25 years ago when my father said, stop wandering, because I was the wandering Jew, come home. 6 months later, he passed on. I came and took care of Mom, and I'm sort of waking up from the dream of wandering all these years to find home, community, and there's a lot more going on in my head. But I just love Talmud, and it just really woke that up in me.
Beautiful.
And I'd like to dedicate my vision of what I just learned to my Talmudic teacher, Rabbi Shochet, who just recently passed.
May his memory be a blessing. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Okay, what other thoughts? We have 3 more minutes, so Janet.
There's so many of our stories that are like Bobamises, and they're simplified. And so it's so great to really dig into the deeply. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you, Janet. You know what? This is what I love so much about this time together. We don't ever afford ourselves, we're so busy and things move, the world moves so fast, and we don't really afford ourselves the opportunity to really root in. And I feel that that's part of what the farmer's message is to us, right? You have to really invest in the planting if you're going to really see the fruit. So I agree, and I am very grateful to be here with all of you doing this. Okay, last comment. Do you have one, Candace?
Do you have another hour?
We have another hour next week to talk about Choni, so we can continue this.
This is what's coming to me. I think it's fascinating. This read is amazing. There's a world in which what the rabbis have done to Choni is a sort of, they have learned a lesson. And it's a sort of polemic of like, don't go to God, right? Go figure things out yourself. And it's almost like God is trying to teach this to Choni already in the Mishnah, right? Because it's like, okay, hear that. Go look and see how this is affecting other people. And yet, like, Choni each time resists that. Like, they come, they tell him whatever, and the only thing he cares about is, like, the ovens and then the Even HaToim. Like, right. He's like, not the people, he's like, these material things.
Right.
How has the rain affected them? But there's that. And so it's, like, really interesting in the sense of, like, right, because what happened with the Hasmoneans is literally what brought the Romans into Judea, which then caused the destruction of the temple and all of the infighting, which is what the rabbis say, right? Sinat Chinam, the infighting, is what brought about the destruction of the temple. So yes, they have learned nothing. And it's like at the Song at the Sea. Moshe goes to pray to God, and God's like, what are you coming to me for?
Right,
Go figure
right.
it out. Like, you can't.
It's so good. It's so good. And also, thank you for saying that, because I'm going to close by just pointing this out. I initially said that the fact that our story starts with Amar Rabbi Yochanan is significant, because it is Rabbi Yochanan who, in the Gittin series of narratives that we read in December, it's Rabbi Yochanan who starts the discourse about why the temple was destroyed. And so this story is seen by some scholars as part of, woven through Rabbi Yochanan, is seen as part of the thread of narratives indicating that that we have to look at our own behavior and not only look at external forces, whether they're the Greek Syrians or the Babylonians or the Romans, but that we have to look at our own behavior. That might be the only thing that we can do to try to understand who we are, who we're called to be, and what we need to do better. And I will leave us with the notion that O Chavruta O Mituta means two things at once. That we need each other and we need each other. right? That level of relational thickness and connection has to function on an individual level, and it has to function on a communal level. And so you can't bypass the individual in order to get to some kind of communal fruition or flourishing. That if the individual does not feel loved, they cannot help build a society of love. And if there's no society of love, then the individual feels love, but the whole world is broken. So our work is actually twofold: to build individual relationships in which people are seen and we navigate grief together, and we particularly help people who are most vulnerable and most alone, and also in which we work hard to reweave together the torn fabric of the broader society and the broader community. Thank you so much, folks. What a joy. I'm gonna ask us to close with Kaddish Rabbanan. RBZ, you might want to say Kaddish for your teacher. Does anyone else have someone for whom you are saying Kaddish today? Scott, do you want to share a name?
My stepfather,
Sai
Levy.
Levy. Sai Levy. His memory be a blessing. Keith, do you want to share a name?
Yes, I had a student that I taught in high school who died tragically before the end of last year.
I'm so sorry, Keith. Thank you. Okay. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah. Bi'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich machutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'me'omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'ama v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon v'al kol Tamidehon v'al kol man da'askim be'oraita di v'atra hadain v'di v'chol atar v'atar Yehei lahonu lachon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin mizonei revicheu for kana min kadam avahundi v'shmaya v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom bimromav hu ya'asei shalom aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'imru amen. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Have a good week.